1 light, 2 lights, 3 lights, 4 lights, 5 lights, and it's go!
Welcome, yes, welcome indeed to a brand new, yes, you heard me right, a brand new episode of Formula One Talk. Initially, I did write a script for this first episode of this new look Formula One Talk. There's not a lot of changes to the channel, but because of a cold that I've had over the last few days, I decided to skip the script writing and go on straight away with a race review for the 2017 Australian Grand Prix. But to begin with, let me explain why I've been not recording Formula One Talk videos for the past couple of years. It's actually been 3.5 years, in fact, since my last F1 Talk video, and that's because of a few reasons. One, I was doing a job search. I was actively seeking employment, and the job search was taking a heck of a lot of time away from recording F1 videos and any other videos for that matter. One thing that was happening in my life, you know, a lot of things were going on. Eventually I found a job in a care home. I still work at that home now, you know, so that's going okay. But sadly, I lost my mother in October of 2013, and that hit me really, really hard, and I still don't think I've properly grieved for her in that true sense. But that was the reason, that was a big reason and a big contributing factor to the fact that I didn't record any Formula One Talk videos. Plus you add in Mercedes dominance from 2014 up until this point, and there wasn't much motivation for recording anything, much less a Formula One video. But you know, new regulations, new testing, and you know, new tyres, cars, aerodynamics, that sort of thing, you know, gives me hope for this season. So that's enough about me and my personal issues and problems. Let's get on with the race review for the 2017 Australian Grand Prix. And pole sitter Lewis Hamilton was speaking rather coyly about his prospects for the year, and obviously for this race in particular. He said that the Ferraris were the favourites to win the race, and everyone was just dismissing that from the start. Hamilton had pole on a 1:22.18. Daniel Ricciardo for Red Bull started in the pit lane, or started in the pits actually. There was a sensor issue on the gearbox leading to his non-start along with the rest of the 19 cars. The thing is the fact that he had a big crash during qualifying 2 after he set his lap time. Didn't come out for qualifying 3. Hence started 10th on the grid, but obviously with a gearbox change he had a 5-place grid penalty, and the sensor issue on the gearbox wouldn't let him start at all. So he started 2 laps after everybody else. There was a second warm-up lap because of some wrong position car. Because of that, the thoughts were that it was Kevin Magnussen going in the wrong spot, where obviously Daniel Ricciardo was ahead of him on the grid. So the race got underway. Good start from Lewis Hamilton, and almost a good start from new Mercedes boy Valtteri Bottas, where we got to turn 3 and Kevin Magnussen and Marcus Ericsson, the Haas and the Sauber, sort of hit each other. Magnussen was found a bit at fault, but there's new regulations this year with regards to the stewards and their decisions on such incidents. I think it's a good idea. We should see a bit more racing rather than someone being directly punished for some said incident. By the end of the second lap, the 2 leaders, Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel, began to streak off into the distance, leaving their number 2s, respectively Bottas and Raikkonen, you know, a few seconds behind. Nothing much really then happened till lap 10, when Stoffel Van Dorn and McLaren, the replacement was Jenson Button. He came in and had to reset the power in the pits because of the fact that he couldn't see what was going on his dashboard on the steering wheel. Williams are the only team to have a separate dashboard and steering wheel set up in the car. You can clearly see it on the in the games from last year. I don't think much has changed because I saw an onboard shot from the Williams a fair few times over the weekend, and we saw a lot of things going on the dashboard. There's so many buttons, as you know, but he had to come into the pits. Meanwhile, between that sort of time and the next incident in the race, Jolyon Palmer of Renault had issues with his brakes, which isn't very good. I mean, basically, if you're a racing driver of any form, you want to stop your brakes. You want your brakes to be working, and that's unsafe. Lap 15, Romain Grosjean of Haas had an engine failure. You could clearly see the die was cast, so to speak, as he came into the pits, and there was a smoky streak behind him, so he was out. Lap 16, it was said that Lewis Hamilton had led 3,000 laps in his career, second individual to do that behind Michael Schumacher, and 100 Grand Prix in the lead. So, in other words, he's led 100 Grand Prix. A lap later, he came into the pits. He'd been complaining for the previous 4 or 5 laps of lack of grip, but the Ferrari of Vettel stayed out. Lap 18, Jolyon Palmer of Renault finally retired with those brake issues. Quite dangerous, in fact. You have to say that it was a good idea to bring him in basically on safety grounds and the safety of not only him but the other drivers as well. It's not really fair on everyone else if they're darting in and out of the way. Lap 20, obviously Hamilton came out of the pits behind the Red Bull of Max Verstappen, and he could not pass him to save his life. He had a couple of messages on the team radio. He had to get past him to save his race. Lap 23, Marcus Ericsson retired again with engine failure in the Sauber. You'll get my thoughts on the upcoming season in the checkered flag in a few minutes' time, which is a new segment for the channel. Like I say, I'll explain that soon. And on the same lap, lap 23, Vettel pitted and rejoined ahead of Hamilton. But here's the more important thing: he rejoined ahead of Verstappen. It wasn't exactly holding Lewis up. It was just the fact that it was for track position, so Lewis couldn't rely on blue flags to get past the Red Bull. So Vettel managed to get out with the help of a very quick stop from Ferrari. Almost flawless work from the Scuderia there. Lap 26, Verstappen came in and obviously released Hamilton, but by then Vettel was like 3 or 4 seconds ahead. Lap 28, Daniel Ricciardo retired with a loss of power. He was just coming into just after turn 3, I think, and you could clearly hear that the engine had just stopped working, so we'll have to see what happens there. New boy for Williams, Canadian Lance Stroll, then retired on lap 44. He seemed to be fighting the car all weekend, and we'll just have to see how his career develops. Turned out later on there was problems with the brake discs, so that's a reason for his retirement. Lap 50, Kevin Magnussen of Haas managed, ended a horrible weekend for the Haas team with suspension failure. Lap 54, Fernando Alonso in the McLaren did absolutely everything he could to keep that car in the points. He got passed by Esteban Ocon and Nico Hülkenberg of Renault, and it was a bit disappointing to say the least. The performance of the McLaren is nowhere near where it should be. Again, further thoughts in a few minutes' time on the checkered flag. And that was basically the last big thing to happen in the Grand Prix. Sebastian Vettel finishes first, a fantastic race. Well driven from Seb, and good strategy from the McLaren team. The overcut, as they kept on mentioning in commentary. Excuse me. The overcut in commentary was the key to the success. The Ferrari was faster and just kinder to its tyres over the race weekend. That was the 225th Ferrari victory, and Gina, as he likes to name his cars, is his name of his car this year. Lewis Hamilton finishes second, third for Valtteri Bottas, fourth for Kimi Raikkonen, who incidentally did the fastest lap of the race at 1:26.53. Verstappen in the Red Bull, fifth. Massa for Williams, the so-called retiree Felipe Massa for Williams. Sergio Perez, seventh. Good result in the Force India with the new look and the new pink livery on the car. Carlos Sainz and Danny Kvyat, eighth and ninth for Toro Rosso. Good haul of points. And the final points paying position went to Esteban Ocon of Force India. Those are obviously the championship standings. And and an interesting point that was brought up in commentary on both Channel 4 and Sky was 19 out of the last 27 seasons, the person who has won the first race of the season has gone on to win that year's championship. So omens all over the place for Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel. Just one other thing to mention, there was booing on the podium for Lewis Hamilton when he was announced to pick up his second place trophy. Despite the so-called boredom of Formula One, despite the so-called unpopularity of Formula One, and the mere fact that, you know, some people may not like the man, there's no need for booing on the podium. You know, the guys have been out there for an hour and a half, or close to an hour and a half in this weekend's case. You know, they're working hard, they're like the racing drivers, they're doing their best, and it's not his fault that Mercedes have been so dominant these past 3 or 4 years. It's the fault of the other teams not being able to develop the cars enough to challenge for race wins and championships. It's not Lewis's fault. You know, Mercedes have won the last 3 world championships and the last 3 constructors championships. So, you know, it's not his fault that Mercedes have been at the front all of the time. But yet he's the one that's getting booed on the podium, and quite frankly, there's no place for that. This is a sport, you know, it's hopefully with the new owners, you know, Bernie Ecclestone has gone, and hopefully it'll be turned into more of a sport rather than a procession, and that's what we're hoping for with these new cars, new tyres, different regulations. You know, things are going to be brought in at a steady pace, because obviously it's too late to add things for 2017. So, on to the new section of Formula One talk called the checkered flag. And this time on the checkered flag, I'm going to further elaborate on my thoughts and hopes for the season, my prediction for the championship, and of course any other thoughts coming out of this first weekend here at Albert Park in Melbourne, Australia. What can we conclude? Not too much, obviously. This is the first true test of the new cars, you know, new regulations, new decision making, new aerodynamics and all of that. It's given us the first championship lead by a non-Mercedes car in the turbo hybrid era that began in 2014. We have to see whether this is a resurgence for Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel in particular, who had a very bad 2016, getting involved with you know, people like Danny Kvyat, who was at Red Bull at the time and now is Toro Rosso. We have to see if things continue on as they are. But yeah, good first race. If that's the sign of things to come for 2017, we've not got a lot to worry about. I think we've got good things coming from Ferrari. We've got good things coming from Mercedes, Red Bull. Bit of a disappointing weekend. You have to say that they're behind to the tune of about, you know, 20 seconds or so in race pace. Had Daniel Ricciardo been fine, he might have been a bit higher up, maybe got the 5th place himself. There was no way the Red Bulls were going to beat the Mercedes or the Ferraris this weekend. A good weekend for Force India and Toro Rosso. You know, double point scores, made up for 4 of the 10 points paying positions. Valtteri Bottas, new boy at Mercedes, you know, did basically what was expected. He managed to stay ahead of Raikkonen in the second Ferrari, managed to finish the race in third, you know, about a second and a half behind Hamilton at the end of the Grand Prix, was catching him to 1 point towards the end, and maybe a bit of team orders came into play. There was nothing, no team radio, no anything to say otherwise if he would have been allowed to pass Hamilton for second, or whether Mercedes were playing a little bit of team orders, which are obviously allowed and have been for a few years now. We'll have to see how the season goes, but we will see what happens with the rest of his season. My prediction now for the championship, and I'll go on with other teams, but the prediction for the championship, only one of, say, 3 or 4 drivers are going to win this thing, and as is quite obvious, obviously before, you know, Sunday, we don't know who's going to be like doing what where, but my prediction is quite an easy one, really. You can see it coming a mile off. I personally think that Lewis Hamilton is going to win this year's championship. It's going to take Bottas a few races to get used to the Mercedes, the power of it, the driving ability of the machine, as it will take everyone a good while to get used to the new cars. But usually a new driver and a new team takes a while to get used to the how the team works, how the cars work, and all of that. And he's just finished his first race for them and finished in 3rd place. That's not too bad. You know, that's his 10th podium. And you have to say that, you know, Hamilton should have the measure of him in the first few races, if not the entire season. Hamilton is he is a naturally gifted driver, no matter what people say, no matter how people feel about him. You know, the boos on the podium notwithstanding, his so-called unpopularity notwithstanding, but Hamilton should take this year's championship, not a problem. Hopefully we will get a title fight from Ferrari and Vettel specifically this year. You know, we may see a fair few wins for the Scuderia this year, but no, it should be another Hamilton-Mercedes triumph in 2017. Hopefully I'm wrong. You know, I'm not exactly rooting for any specific team, although I will mention another team in a couple of moments' time. But, yeah, so there's my pick for the championship, and obviously the constructors. I hope we get lots of decent action. I hope we get a lot of passing. You know, just some good racing, although it has been mentioned that the new aerodynamics have caused a bit of difficulty for passing. It was mentioned in Channel 4 commentary, at least, that Lewis Hamilton went to go see Ross Brawn about the lack of overtaking and how things need to be changed in that area, so to speak. You know, I'm still a firm believer of, you know, rolling back the aerodynamics so that they're attuned to like late 80s, early 90s in terms of the aerodynamics, you know, and that's what they should be. I mean, I counted the elements on the Red Bull's front wing, and there were like 7 different elements or on each side, which means there are like 14 different elements to the front wing, and that's probably one of the reasons why these cars do not allow overtaking. I mean, I'm looking at my F1 car collection now, and the elder cars, or the cars that I'm looking at specifically, have maybe 5 elements maximum to the front wing, and maybe that's a thing that could be adjusted, you know, so we'll see. As for the other teams, we do need to see quite a lot of performance improvement from Sauber. I personally think they could be facing their last year in Formula 1. Sadly, you know, there was a graphic at the start of the Grand Prix superimposed on the grass as their cars were taking their formation lap. The first one, of course, to say that they were celebrating 25 years in Formula 1. You know, it's, you know, well played to them, but the way things are going and the way, you know, Sauber's not the biggest team. In fact, it's probably the smallest team in Formula 1 left after the departure of Manor at the end of last season. Will they last another year? Probably not. If they need to score some points this year. They had a pointless campaign, literally, in 2016. They need to score points. They need to score a fair few, I think. But onto the team I was talking about earlier that I'm particularly rooting for at the moment. You know, there's a little bit of bias. You'll see that in the F1 Talk um, picture logo on the channel. I'm specifically rooting for McLaren Honda, and I have been since Honda came back into the sport in 2015, because of the fact that, you know, you see the most powerful car in F1 history was the MP4-4 back in 1988, where Prost and Senna were driving. They won 15 out of 16 races, and probably the most dominant car in the history of Formula One. And I just want to go back to those days where they were feared. You know, those white and red cars were absolutely feared when they were coming up to a back marker, and you knew who was driving that car. It was two of the greatest drivers of all time, you know. But, you know, there's rumours that McLaren have been in contact with Mercedes over power units, and the contract that they have with Honda is rather, it's not ironclad, but it'd be very difficult to get away from. But, you know, after 3 years, or, you know, this is their third year back in Formula One, you would think that they would have a bit more reliability. In fact, you think they would have a lot more reliability and a lot more power than what they actually have at the moment. It's quite frankly embarrassing watching a McLaren, you know, with their new look livery, the orange and black livery that they've got now, going back to the days of Bruce McLaren when he drove his orange car around tracks and things like that. But it is embarrassing to see this once magnificent team, and they probably are still a great team. It's just the fact that it's embarrassing to see those cars being passed by everything but like Renaults and Saubers, which are like the two worst cars on the grid. It's not, the car isn't as bad as first thought. They had a lot of problems in practice. They had a lot of problems in winter testing, but it's going to be another difficult year, and unless McLaren themselves break the contract with Honda, maybe try and get those Mercedes engines back, they're not going to be fighting for podiums, they're not going to be fighting for race wins, and that's going to be the interesting thing. Who's going to go first? Is it going to be Honda, or is it going to be Fernando Alonso? You know, Stoffel Van Dorn is their new so-called prodigy. He's naturally talented. We saw that when he deputised for Alonso last year in Bahrain at the second round last year. But can McLaren sort of keep their so-called dream alive with Honda for the renaissance of that partnership? Because at the moment it's just stupid watching them fight for 16ths and 15ths. You know, it's pathetic. By now Honda should have pulled their socks up. They did develop a new engine, I do believe, for this year, but we have to see what happens to them. We have to see what happens to everyone around them. You know, could we see a McLaren Mercedes rebranding by, say, mid-season? I doubt it. If anything like that's going to happen, it happens, you know, at the end of a season. As for Renault, they haven't really got a lot to smile about. Those brake problems for Jolyon Palmer, Nico Hulkenberg, who joined the team after a fair few years at Force India. He felt that he had to get out of his contract with Force India, and he did. And he's joined Renault. Excuse me. And perhaps a step backwards. But we'll have to see how their season develops. They'll be fighting for the rear end of the grid, which is sad. You know, the Constructors' Champions, 10 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, they were right up the top. So we'll have to see what happens for the remainder of the season. It's a good start for Formula One in this new era of the wider cars, the wider tyres, which should provide more grip, closer racing. But will it provide overtaking? That's what we need in Formula One right now. And we also need, race wins to see who, gets the upper hand on a track like next time out in China, where we've seen the Mercedes come back. It's a bit more of a power circuit. We've just had a street circuit. Now we have a purpose-built circuit that is better suited to power. And we'll have to see what happens. Will Ferraris gain more ground, or will Mercedes come out and so-called take revenge on not winning their first race for a while and not obviously winning the first race of the season for 2 or 3 years. So we'll have to see how the season develops. Hopefully we're in for a cracking season. And I'll try and keep you updated on Formula One talk. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time for more Formula One talk.